Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Dirty Habits. I'm Brother Chris.
And I'm Brother Justin.
And today we're going to be talking about one of those mysteries of the Bible and the Judeo-Christian faith. We're talking about the Nephilim. So if you don't know what that is, stay tuned because you will find out.
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay, so you were the one who kind of wanted to bring this up,
I
right?
did because I've heard you, Chris and I teach lots of different Bible studies and catechetics at local churches here in San Diego. And Chris, you've brought up the Nephilim sort of in passing around me before. And the take that you have on it is different from what I was given during my studies. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I wanted to talk about it, because I think that your take is kind of more on the I don't mean this the wrong way, but like the fantastical. Mm-hmm. And the take that I was given, like the interpretation that I was given on this, was more grounded in some sort of like I guess, for lack of a better term, like a historical critical way of looking at it. So anyway, the question is, what are the Nephilim? Where do they show up in the Bible? And this is kind of where we start. Genesis 6, verses 1 through 8. I'm going to read the New Revised Standard Version.
Okay.
But there's a couple other versions I wanted to look at. But this is where the Nephilim first show up. It's very interesting. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord." So that's where the Nephilim show up. It's like this one reference to the Nephilim in all of Scripture. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's so intriguing. What are these Nephilim? Were they some sort of strange species that came out of this union of the daughters of man and the sons of God? There's some sort of connection between them and the wickedness on the earth that prompted the deluge, the flood,
Right.
In the story of Noah. And so, yeah, that's where they first show up. Now, in the NRSV CE, the New Revised Standard Version, Catholic edition of the passage, the terms are the sons of God and the daughters of humans.
Right.
That's how it reads. I wanted to bring up, though, that is how that particular translation coins the phrase, I suppose. Those are the terms that translation uses. But in the New American Standard Version, it says that it's the sons of God and the daughters of mankind, not human beings, but mankind.
Okay.
Which is a more general term. And then if you look at the Orthodox Jewish version of the scripture, it reads, "And it came to pass when Chadam began to multiply in the face of Chadamah, and Banot were born unto them, that the Benai Cha'Elohim saw that Banot Chadam, that they were Tavot, and they took them Nashim of all which they chose." Okay, so when Chadam began to multiply, that's like humanity,
beings, right?
Mankind. And then they began to multiply in the face of Hadamah on the earth, right? And Banot were born unto them, the daughters were born unto them, that the Benai Elohim saw that the daughters of man were beautiful, right? So what's interesting, I brought that up because, as I'll mention later, the term Adam does not necessarily mean man or the first man. It can refer to the earth or the clay of the earth, like the actual ground, the material of the earth. So anyway, that allows for a lot of more metaphorical interpretations, I think, of what the passage is intending to convey. Mm-hmm. So, Chris, interpretations. You have conveyed to me before a more fantastical interpretation of the Nephilim.
Right.
Where it's more like, you've seen the movie Noah with Russell
Crowe?
Yeah. Where there's like weird tree rock monster things like from the Neverending Story. Right. Like those are like the Nephilim, I think.
Right, yeah.
Right. So why don't you go ahead and explain to me, because I've never asked you before, like for an actual like in-depth explanation of what you've held, or at least what you've been taught or have studied regarding the Nephilim, and I can't wait to hear it. Because, yeah.
Well, in the mainline interpretation I'm giving is one that seems to have been the Jewish one, at least until much more modern times. And it was actually the view of any fathers who spoke of it until Augustine.
That's interesting.
Augustine's the first one to come up because he didn't like this. He didn't understand how it could occur, like what the other people were saying. But I want to step back for a moment and go to the first rebellion, because this is kind of like a second fall in a sense. The angels that are involved here, however they're involved, that create whatever the Nephilim are. And go back to the primordial one. In the garden. And the reason I want to bring that one up is because, again, there seems to be a connection. It's not one that you hear a lot today, but when you read the Talmud and such, when Satan comes in the form of the serpent to tempt Adam and Eve, and that fall, you have the whole story about the seed afterwards. The Satan, her seed will crush your head, but it actually outlines that there'll be a battle that Satan has seed, whatever that means, his children. So there's already this connection between that, and there does seem to be a sexual connection that we don't necessarily draw so closely anymore of what Satan is doing with Eve. And in fact, it's interesting.
Well, that's in the rabbinic text.
Right, in the rabbinic text. But even in certain, I forget what cathedral it is, has a picture of Eve of Satan kind of wrapping himself around her in a very suggestive sense.
Yeah.
But either way, this idea of what it seems to be a theme that's running, that at least the early rabbis and the fathers saw, was that there's a competing, quote, seed for who's going to rule the earth. Will it be the seed of the fallen angel, or will it be the seed of God? And so we jump ahead all this time, whoever knows how long in between. And in between the event of the Nephilim in chapter 6 that you read and the story of the fall, we have Cain cast out, and supposedly idolatry begins with Cain, but at some point it connects with Shem's line as well, or not Shem, who replaced Abel? Seth's line. In the time of Enosh, is what Scripture says. So you kind of have this this setup that we've now introduced idolatry into the human race. Mm-hmm. You already have the fall and this kind of demonic thing of his progeny coming. Mm-hmm. And then we get to this weird story in chapter 6 of Genesis. And like you said, the Old Testament it actually mentions it in ways that we'd be surprised, I think. But generally speaking, you're right. There's no real big follow-up. And even a lot of the things, as you read through the story, they're weird, right? It's all they were before the flood and afterwards. And you're like...
And the heroes of old.
How did anything survive the flood?
Yeah.
But...
they're the heroes of old.
And the term
What does that
Nephilim
mean?
is odd too because it's we're not entirely sure what it means. There's a lot of different things, but it seems to be related to Hebrew terms for abortion, for miscarriage, which is Nephilim.
Whoa.
Yeah, so there's something that should not
so that I didn't know.
should
That's
not be, you know. So
yeah,
anyway,
it's like something that shouldn't be. It's
right.
Like,
It's
it's unintended.
so at least what the basic gist is they tended to read the story quite literally in the sense that angels came down, committed some sexual sin with human women, and the things born of this are the Nephilim, you know, half human, half angelic, so to speak, beings, which now, in a sense, the line of human beings has now been corrupted by the line of the fallen angels.
This blows my mind,
Chris. So you have two competing human races in a sense, almost.
Yeah.
Because the Nephilim aren't necessarily they're powerful men. It talks about the men of renown and such. But
but here's why this blows my mind, though. On just a basic natural level, how can a species that is immaterial, like an angel, have intercourse with something that's material, and then an offspring is like a material offspring as a result?
Yeah. Well, that's part of the issue is until the 1300s, the definition of angel that we use so commonly today, used by Aquinas and such as being a completely immaterial being, was not held in the same way before. They believed that angels had to have a body because only God didn't have a body, was kind of the ancient thinking. So if you read, I think even your namesake, I think even Justin Martyr mentions they have bodies of fire or bodies of something else.
He does? How did I not know that? That's so cool.
Yeah.
Shout out to St. Justin.
So
His feast day was just recently.
In that sense, part of it's a change in our definition of spirit of the angels themselves.
Interesting.
Now, you can still go with it because Aquinas, even in the 13th century, talks about this, where he said the demon would possess like the woman or the man, and then have the seed put into them, and then they would possess the others. Like it was almost like the demon manipulated it, and all the parts, the egg and the semen, are all human, but it would manipulate its. I don't know. But actually, it's a question that Aquinas answers because he's asked, how can the succubi and incubi exist, which they still believed in, these sexual demons? How can they?
Where does he mention that?
When we were doing our original thing, I pulled that one out, so I'll have to look at what question it is. I think it's in the supplement to the Summa, if I'm right.
No way.
But
because it says they married any of them they chose. So why use the word married?
I don't think that's a correct. I think it actually says they took.
Yeah,
took
to bed.
Yeah.
Kinda,
so in effect, they didn't marry him, and it also seems to imply a polygamy. Like it's sort of distorted in every way of what they've done.
It wasn't sanctified. Just kidding.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's
just like later, that they get the angels here because of that get cast away. Although that's not actually described in the story. The flood is described, and the Nephilim's fate, the angelic fate, we do hear about in 2 Peter and Jude, because it's clear he's alluding to this instance, because he talks about those angels who didn't keep to their own domain but went after unnatural flesh. And it's interesting because he connects the story in 2 Peter and Jude, both connect it to Sodom and Gomorrah, where there you have homosexuality, unnatural, and the other one is human. It's like almost like celestial bestiality, like like the angels and having sex with something of a different whole group.
So to sum up this interpretation, there's the first rebellion, which is the fall of the angels, that we're all pretty much familiar with if you're in the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? A second rebellion occurred when angels took human women and impregnated them.
Yeah.
And then some sort of unnatural or I guess undesirable offspring came out of that, and the Bible calls them the Nephilim.
Yeah.
And then they end up becoming like the heroes of old. There's some sort of power.
Right,
that
they're powerful because of their angelic.
That's so interesting.
Supposedly, from this perspective, and again, some people still hold this, others hold other things. Because there are these hybrid creatures, when the flood comes, it destroys their human part, but their angelic spirit lives on, but attached to this world. And that's why...
Wait, where's that from?
That's the idea they came up with, because that's what a demon was understood by Judaism. A demon isn't the same. And even Paul seems to make the distinction between the demons, and then you have the principalities, all the really powerful angels. And that's the whole reason under this thought that they want a body. Like, the principalities and powers don't possess people. They don't need to. But the demons are looking for an experience they once had, so they've been around forever.
Addendum.
Yeah.
So then, from what I had summed up earlier, the Nephilim after the flood are separated. Their angel part and their human part is destroyed.
Right.
And their angel part lives on, and that is
those are the demons. Yeah.
That's trying to inhabit bodies and possess people, and it's so interesting.
And now so modern day Catholic exorcists, I've heard a couple of them say they've only added to that without entering into the question if that's what a demon is. But they do say an additional reason of why they want to take possession of bodies is to in some way either insult or to imitate the incarnation. So it adds another dimension to the whole thing.
So the original Nephilim in their original body did not possess a soul, like that body wasn't a human.
Well, it was
soul.
human. It just, whatever part of them was angelic, their spirit, their whatever it is, lives on. I mean, presumably, if that's true, then it'd be the same ones have been alive forever. There's no more, no less. There's just them. Now, maybe we'll talk about sometime soon is the Nephilim do continue to appear throughout the whole story of the Torah and the books of Judges, and so I'll mention that afterwards.
Where
we see, because I guess what they appear of, it talks them as as giant men,
like Goliath,
right,
and
that's the thing is the Septuagint translates it as gigantes, the giants. So whether they're
not the Nephilim, they're the giants.
That's what they translate it as, and hence Goliath will be the end of the whole line of those. Not directly Nephilim, but descended from them in some way.
That's why David
you have all these
so
words
exalted.
Like the Anakim, the Rephidim. You have all these words that come out.
Yeah.
So, looking at this question, the Nephilim, which we've talked about, these human angelic hybrids found in Genesis 6. Then the flood occurs, but even in chapter 6 that you read that one time, it said, they were there before the flood, comma, and afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it says, quote, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them.
So we move ahead all the way to the story of the Exodus. And it's interesting because after being freed from Israel on their journey to the Promised Land, we suddenly have little tidbits here and there of humans that have in some way still descended from those Nephilim. They clearly aren't as powerful as the Nephilim were. They're not fully whatever perhaps they're even fully human, but just
they have some sort of trait
or connected to the Nephilim. But in fact, one of the parts that a lot of people, both Christian or Jewish Christian or otherwise, one of the parts that disturbs them sometimes of the Old Testament is the harem laws of the Old Testament, to destroy these cities and everything in it. But what's interesting, on a closer reading, you'll see that the only cities God said to do that to were cities that had remnants of these particular people in it. In other words, He is literally wiping out the seed of these groups. So let me give you an example from Deuteronomy of what God tells Moses at this point. And this is This is Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 9 to 12. The Lord said to me, "Do not trouble the people of Moab, the descendants of Lot, or start a war against them. For I have given them this land, and I am not going to give you any of their land. A mighty race of giants called the Emim used to live here. They were as tall as the Anakim, another race of giants. Like the Anakim, they were also known as Rephaim, but the Moabites called them Emim." So all that stuff means there's all these like lineal lines descended from...
And all these cultures that identified...
Right, the Anakim, the Rephaim, the Emim.
Giants.
And all these people of the Middle East. Sorry. Middle East talked about them. He does the same thing later to the Ammonites. He says, "Also do not enter into the land of the Ammonites or trouble them, because I'm not going to give you their land. Their territory once belonged to the Rephaim, the name of the people who used to live there. They were as tall as the Anakim. There were many of them, and they were a mighty race. But the Lord destroyed them, and the Ammonites took their land and settled there." So you have him telling the people that Israel can't attack is because God has already done the same thing with them against his enemies, these Nephilim descended cultures. Wow. And that's what Israel is now going to do in its part of the Middle East. And so he actually gives this command several times. So in chapter 19 of Deuteronomy, we have another kind of interesting thing. He says, where is it? Joshua. So in Joshua, in Joshua, at the beginning of Joshua's ministry, this is what God commissions Joshua to do. He says, "While Joshua was near Jericho, he saw the man standing in front of him suddenly holding a sword. Joshua went to him and asked, 'Are you one of our soldiers or the enemy?' 'Neither,' the man replied. 'I am here as the commander of the Lord's army.' Joshua threw himself on the ground and worshipped and said, 'I am your servant, sir. What do you wish us to do?' And he tells him to take his sandals off and stand on holy ground. So a lot of people have said it's the angel of the Lord. Some said it's Saint Michael, the man who portrays himself. But then they give this, this is the commandment that they actually tell Joshua here. And he says, "At this time Joshua went and destroyed the race of giants called the Anakim, who lived in the hill country, in Hebron, Debir, Anab, and in all the hill country of Judah and Israel. Joshua completely destroyed them and their cities. None of those Anakim were then left any more in the land of Israel. A few, however, were left because they fled to Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod, the Philistine cities from where Goliath will come later, the last of these strange beings."
Whoa!
And we're told just a few chapters later, where it's given more specificity, where the tribe of Judah, so the ancestors of both King David and especially of Jesus himself, were told that Caleb, who was one of the only two spies who didn't fear entering the Holy Land, he said, "Caleb drove the descendants of Anak, the Anakim, out of the city." It even names them, the clans of Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. From there he went to attack the people who lived in Debir. So again, that's where they fled. And if you remember the original reason, those of you, when they send them to reconnoiter the land, remember why they're scared?
Yeah, because there's giants.
The people are giant. Yeah. They're so huge and stuff. And so you follow that through then, and then eventually it's literally Goliath and his brothers, because his brothers are mentioned as being killed by some of David's men later.
Interesting.
So in the books of Samuel, you have the defeat of Goliath, and so it's basically Israel has finally conquered all the last sort of remnants of these once powerful groups. So Yeah, I mean, there's really, and I only gave a few. There's actually, I'll give you the handouts to look at too. But if you follow it through, it really is crazy. We've just given kind of bullet points of this ongoing war of the seeds, so to speak. I guess the ultimate culmination later will be, of course, the Antichrist, who is 100% human, right? It's the number of a man,
right?
But in the sense that they're the children of the serpent, because in some way they continue to, live out his desires, fulfill his will, things like that.
So can I share with you my far less intriguing interpretation of Genesis 6?
Of course.
I mean, the fantasy nerd in me loves the fantastical interpretation, and I'd never talked to you about it before, and so in depth I've never really gotten all of this explanation about the Nephilim and angels with some sort of spiritual body being able to impregnate human women and stuff. And I have to confess, since all of my education in theology has been very Dominican, even though I'm Franciscan, sort of the tradition after Thomas Aquinas has really informed my formation. And in this particularly, it's a very, naturalistic explanation. Mm-hmm. So it's not nearly as intriguing or entertaining, but I'm going to share it with you, okay?
Yeah.
So just to recap, the passage in question, it's that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown.
Right.
So this is how I was kind of taught to interpret this.
Okay.
And I have to tell you too, honestly, they presented my professors the fantastical explanation of the angelic species, sort of like crossbreeding hybrids with humans and stuff, as if it was presented to me as if that was crazy.
Yeah. No, I'm sure. Yeah.
But I think from the post-Aquinas Dominican tradition, that's kind of where that comes from, I suppose. But so this is how I was taught to interpret it. The quote, sons of God were the righteous descendants of Adam, right? Okay. The line of Seth. The daughters of humans, or the daughters of mankind, refers to pagan women,
right?
Or the line of Cain, right? Basically, anyone who wasn't of the righteous line of Seth. And then the Nephilim were the offspring of the two. So what they taught me was that while Adam is the name of the first man in Genesis, it's important to remember that in ancient Hebrew, the word Adam is directly defined as red clay or red ground. So in this interpretation of the Nephilim, we could read the text as the sons of God saw that the daughters of the earth were beautiful. And the daughters of the earth can be taken in any number of metaphorical ways. So I was sort of instructed to take a canonical read of all the scriptures, so from Old Testament to New. And really, if you do that the suggestion then is that this passage is juxtaposing two types of people. Those whom God considers to be his sons, and then those who seem to belong to the earth. Or more bluntly, those who belong to the eternal versus those who belong to the corruptible. Mm-hmm. And after all, pagan idols were made of earthly materials, right? Pagan idols were fashioned out of clay. They were fashioned out of gold, out of gems and stones and whatnot, out of wood. So under this interpretation, the designation of daughters of the earth is almost a pejorative aimed at the pagan cults. So from all of that, the Nephilim could have been the heroes of the ancient world that we read about in the classics, like Heracles, mm-hmm. or Odysseus, or any number of Aeneas, like any number of famous Greek legends and ancient heroes. Not just Greek, but the Enuma Elish. There's Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Like all of that could be Nephilim. Those could all be, quote, Nephilim according to the scriptures. Or they could have been ancient heroes whose legendariums are completely lost to time. Like, we've just lost track of what the legends actually are. Mm-hmm. But regardless, this interpretation of the passage, it lends itself nicely to kind of the recurring biblical theme that one wicked spouse can spiritually corrupt an entire lineage of people, and enough wicked spouses can lead to the corruption of entire nations of people, right? Which is why the flood of Noah had to happen, because all the world ended up being corrupted. So that's the naturalistic explanation that I was given, but there's almost a synthesis between the two.
That's what I was thinking too.
Right?
Is I think they're not in. And in fact, I think the Bible, when the Bible mentions Nimrod, the great hunter, who's the founder of Babylon, he's understood in Jewish tradition, has always been understood to be one of the descendants of the Nephilim.
Interesting.
That's why Babel had the knowledge of before the flood. And they prided themselves on that.
Well, the uniting idea between the two interpretations, the fantastical, the more natural, is the demonic.
Yeah.
Like there is some sort of fallen entity
right.
that is exerting some sort of influence on things. It could be to the point of that entity actually taking the human being and making it a spouse of sorts, you know? Or it could be that demonic entity, through its cult of worship, is influencing human beings to do certain things, you know? But
and when I mentioned that idolatry sort of comes in with Cain, you know, it sort of does connect the two, or the secret knowledge that they gave to human beings, which is kind of an underlying theme.
Well, what's interesting though is that the naturalistic interpretation.
How did your teachers touch on the point that nowhere else in Scripture is the term "sons of God" used of anything but that's angels?
That's where you have to lean on. Well, the first few chapters of Genesis, they've gone through so many redactions. It's gone through such an oral tradition that certain parts of stories were memorized a certain way before they were written down, while others were memorized a certain way too. And so there's different terms that show up that don't necessarily concord until later on. Then we can get it, and that's where it gets a little muddy. It's like, I don't know. I mean, really, it's I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I know most biblical scholars, at least the ones I'm aware of, consider that passage to be very old, like even within Genesis, because it's cool. Touched on. The thing is it's a Middle Eastern passage. I mean, that is, Gilgamesh was supposedly half, they wouldn't have called it demon, but half a son of God, half, you know, we have all these. That's the other thing that's interesting about this, and totally going way off our track, is the Greeks gods had to defeat the Titans, huge beings. We have our gigantes, our giants.
Yeah.
The Irish had to conquer the Foimayor and the Fomorians, who were giant. Like, every culture...
What were the Filipinos doing?
I don't know. They don't have a giant...
I think they were just chilling.
We heard a great one yesterday from our senior.
What?
Our speaker coming up for Lent is the old papal nuncio of the Scandinavian countries. He just retired, and he wants to get back with people.
Okay.
He had less than 700 Catholics in all three countries, and he said they were all Filipino.
Excellent. we keep the faith. We keep it together. But I was going to say the giants mentioned throughout Scripture, you know, under the naturalistic interpretation, it's really just like the Israelites see these people and they're just wusses.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, I don't know. The fact that the term giant shows up over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And that's a translation into English that we get from the Septuagint. Right?
And Philo has a whole book on the giants. It's one of his books.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Philo does?
Yeah.
And he's where we get a lot of really good stuff on the Todah sacrifices, too. So I'm inclined to believe him.
And then, you know, that's why I said, you know, when you look at 2 Peter and Jude, too, because they're referring to this, it says, you know, God did not spare the angels who sinned, but threw them into hell where they are kept closed in darkness, chained for the day of judgment. For he did not spare the ancient world, but brought the flood upon the godless people, except for Noah, and then condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, destroying them as an example. It's interesting how the author connects the three things of the angels have to be the ones connected to Noah, because it's clearly that story. And then they connect it to another sexual sin at the end with Sodom and Gomorrah. And then Jude's even more specific about exactly what that was. He says, what does he say? Here it is. Remember those angels who did not stay within the limits of their proper authority, but abandoned their own dwelling place and are now bound with eternal change in utter darkness. God keeps them for the great day on which they will be condemned. Remember Sodom and Gomorrah, the nearby towns whose people acted as those angels did and indulged in sexual immorality and perversion. They suffer the punishment. And now think of this one. Now it makes sense of the weird phrase that Paul just throws out in the middle of Corinthians where he says, and women have to keep something on their head because of the angels. We've always thought of it as a term of respect, but maybe it's a term of not turning the angels on.
That's incredible.
Isn't it? It's weird, like when you get these...
That's
when
in the New Testament.
Right, that's Paul talking. He's all in...
I cannot believe that. Yeah, that never showed up in any...
Would you look up that passage? It's something, women's headpiece for the angels, so I can... And I'll read what it says.
You're reading Jude right now.
Yeah, Jude is pretty explicit about it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
He links the whole notion of
he links
sexuality with the angels. And wow.
I mean, if you even think about Sodom and Gomorrah, they were trying to be homosexual, but they were actually asking to have sex with angels there, too. They just didn't know they were angels.
Were they?
Yeah, remember it was the two men. They're like, bring out
the two men. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Weird, but
yeah. It's 1 Corinthians 11:10.
Yeah, it's one of those weird that I never had. No one ever... 1 Corinthians 11:10. Like, I never got a good explanation from any of my teachers either. In the middle of talking about covering your head in worship, he says, on account of the angels, then, a woman should have a covering over her head to show she's under her husband's authority. So the angel can't swoop her, I guess. It's like,
so what about women who aren't under a husband's authority?
Well, you still have to wear the head. You'd be under your father's authority then.
Oh.
Probably is... But it's weird that he gives a reason as the angels, and no one was ever, even like the study Bibles, most of them are like, we don't know exactly what this means. But
does the Ignatius Study Bible have anything about it?
I don't know. There's one right behind you, actually.
Oh, is there? Oh, yeah.
But I know Scott Hahn really likes the Augustinian interpretation, so I don't know if he'll put that in. But I'm
from the Scott Hahn tradition.
Right. I love Scott Hahn, a lot of his things. But like I said, and you said, I think there's actually a lot of linking between the two more so than it may appear at first.
Well, yeah, and that was the point that my professors made, was the two interpretations are actually really strongly linked together, because it's still the demonic that's kind of driving the whole thing.
Right.
So it was 11 what? Head coverings?
Yeah. 11:10, I think, or
something. 11:10. So are there any notes? A warning that gender confusion and improper attire at worship will offend the heavenly hosts. That was Scott Hahn's take.
Okay.
The underlying idea is that 1, angels are ministers of the natural order, and 2, angels are present in the sacramental worship of the church. Okay. It is Scott Hahn.
Yeah.
But, still, the canonical reading that you've presented from Old Testament, New Testament is still really intriguing, And
it is...
and this is just one interpretation.
And who is... I think it's Sirach who mentions or Book of Wisdom. It's one of those two that mentions the giants as well, and God destroying them in the flood. And it clearly says giants there, because instead of Nephilim. I don't think the word Nephilim occurs except one more time in the Torah when it...
Does it occur another time?
I think it occurs once more when it talks about the Anakim as having been somehow descended from...
from the
Nephilim at some point.
So what do you think? Where do you lean? More fantastical versus more natural explanation?
I don't know. I like the fantastic. I like them both. Actually,
it's so interesting.
I think the thing we have to get over is
they both make sense.
I think the thing that we have to get over is Augustine's knee-jerk reaction that can't happen because of how he wanted to define spirit and matter. Yeah. But the ancients didn't.
The bigger one is
feel
Aquinas.
That way.
Aquinas is the one who's really, as the universal doctor of the church.
But I think all the pieces are there, right? Both have idolatry as part of the background, at least in their idea of whether it was introduced or whether it was it comes through Cain's line. Even the interpretation I presented said that it connects back to the seed, and the progeny. I mean, yeah, and then it follows the general story of the two ways, right? You have the two trees, then you have the two sons, Cain and Abel. Now you have two human lines, so to speak. So they all kind of fit together in a sense.
Yeah.
But
my knee-jerk reaction for me is the more naturalistic explanation. But our conversation has opened up my mind more to the more fantastical, spiritual side of it, because that it is very interesting. And the fact that it has such a strong anchor in the life of the church until you get to Augustine, and there's somewhat of an innovation there, right?
And even Augustine, his interpretation doesn't become the norm. Like I said, even in the 1300s when Thomas presents his isn't. It's not the only. A lot of people still hold to, because they're reading the fathers, right? So they're seeing. Well, they say that they have bodies. No, they're not these bodies.
So
they're
which
not
fathers do I need to read?
The best thing would be go to the Catholic Encyclopedia, look up the angels.
Yeah, okay.
And in that, it'll talk about them, and it'll
not
give you
the
quotes
Nephilim. Look up the angels.
Yeah, because in the angels, it's where you'll find out that the fathers taught or believed that they had bodies, but just made of some material that was not like
and
ours.
For all of you viewers that are wondering where you can find the Catholic Encyclopedia, it is not something that you need to wait for some door-to-door salesman to come and sell to you a physical copy of some book. Although that would be cool if you had physical copies of the Catholic Encyclopedia.
We have it here.
You do?
Yeah.
So cool. You can go to newadvent.org and do a search on newadvent.org of just about any term, and it will return to you what the Catholic Encyclopedia entry is on that for free.
And it'll bring up Aquinas too, and a lot of them.
Yeah, you can also get all of the patristic writings and the Summa Theologiae on there too. So.
And comment what you guys think. The natural way?
Yeah. Natural or supernatural?
Natural or supernatural?
There's also a book by Michael Heiser, Heiser. Could you look it up real quick, Quinn? Michael Heiser. And
you don't know the name?
He's wrote one just called Angels, one called Demons, but the one that I'm thinking of is something of the supernatural or the unseen world, or...
He talks about the Nephilim?
Almost the whole book's about it.
Really?
The Unseen what?
So cool.
Realm?
The Unseen Realm by Michael Heiser is a book if you really want to delve into this.
Is he Catholic?
He's not, but he's his whole background is Semitic languages and things, so he goes over all the stuff. That's where I found all the passages in the Torah, and so that I had no idea about, where it referred to these giants going through
that's
history.
what we need. We need Brant Petrie.
Yeah.
Dr. Brant Petrie. If you ever stumble across this video, we want you to write a book on the Nephilim. You're like the premier Catholic linguist when it comes to ancient Hebrew, and we want some good Catholic resources on this too.
Yeah.
Right?
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've done this one justice, at least for now, so...
I think so.
Cheers.
Cheers. Hey, we're the Dirty Habits Catholic Podcast, and if you enjoyed that video, then please make sure you like, you subscribe, you smash that notification button, and come back and check out some more videos by me, Brother Justin, and Brother Chris.